One of the takeaways I didn't really talk about last week was Chris Krebs really said we don't necessarily need more regulation, we need smarter regulation. And I couldn't agree more. There's too many people out there that believe compliance is security. But is it? Let's talk about it. All right, everybody loves auditors. We love the checklist. We love the, hey, you need to be doing this. Is it a yes or a no? With no gray area. Because that's the way it works. Except compliance doesn't look at the risk of the business. It doesn't look to mitigate the risk of the business completely. It's just about completing something. And auditors don't want to hurt your feelings too much, but they also want to make sure that you are given your money's worth. So sometimes they'll just choose to be a little harder on one part than another part because there's so much latitude there. At the end of the day, being compliant does not mean you're secure. And it actually kind of hurts security because being compliant might mean that you have to do less secure things to meet the regulation. Let's talk about a simple example. In Michigan and in a lot of other states, you can ride a motorcycle without a helmet on. You're compliant with the law. Is that a really good risk mitigation strategy? To me, no. To some people, maybe. But it illustrates the problem between compliance and actually looking at your risks and trying to mitigate risks that you have. So this video is all about the way that compliance actually hurts security, and maybe we talk about things that we should be doing or things that we should be changing to make security better within the frameworks of the compliance that we're tied to. Let's define the compliance real quick. It's really just the accountability of an organization to follow certain security parameters or requirements. It's designed to help you reduce your risk, but so is a good cybersecurity program. The difference is the cybersecurity program usually does a better job at managing risk than a compliance program. So I'll give you an example, right? In a compliance program, it might ask you, hey, do you have a patch management solution? A patch management program? Well, yes, I do. Cool, you're done. All you have to say is yes. Whereas cybersecurity should be looking at, okay, yes, we have a patch management program, but how are we actually finding the vulnerabilities, assessing the patch, getting it out there, verifying its patch, testing it against it to make sure that it's not exploitable? That's not in compliance. And that's where the real problem comes in, is compliance isn't security, because compliance is only a bunch of checkboxes. And that's why in a compliance program, risk might not be reduced as much as you really think it is, because it's just black or white. Number one, compliance is binary, but security risk isn't. I think this is my favorite one, because in compliance, you're just asking a question and then you're just answering it with a yes or a no. There's no nuance to it. There's no gray area. But the reality is security isn't like that. Security risk isn't like that. There's a lot of nuance to it. A good example would be a password policy. In compliance, they may say, hey, you need to be a minimum of 8 characters, a number, uppercase, lowercase, and a symbol. Okay, that's cool. But in reality, a longer password is actually a much more secure password than one that's shorter. So if I tell you to make a sentence that's 25 characters long, that's actually a better password than an 8-character password meeting those parameters. However, if you don't have all those parameters in that 25-character password, you're not compliant. So you have to say my password policy isn't compliant to the regulation, even though it's better than the regulation. Example 2 would be, hey, inside that password, they're going to say you need account lockout. That's great. But if it's a 25-character password, the chances of cracking that password are extremely limited. And again, you could create a denial of service attack against a company by having account lockouts. But in the regulation, it says you have to have it. So you have to have the account lockouts. So it's limiting how much you can actually go outside the box to secure your organization and reduce your risk. And that's the first part that makes compliance actually worse for security. Number 2 is regulations and compliance are always behind. If you look at documentation, you read it, sometimes you'll even see mentions of like floppy disks, right? When was the last time you used a floppy disk? You don't see things like quantum computing, password reuse, ransomware, third-party risk management, I don't know, supply chain management. Those are all real world risks today that just compliance hasn't really adapted to because regulations are extremely slow to change. So it puts organizations at a risk because if they're just being compliant, they're not doing anything more, they're just checking the boxes. You're not up to date. So this brings me to my next point. Number 3 is compliance is not always relevant. When you look at the security risks that you have today as a business, social engineering and phishing are going to be number 1, probably patching number 2. And those are going to lead to a majority of the security instances inside of your business or maybe a breach. But there's very few paragraphs actually talking about that. Some of it will be like, hey, you need security awareness training. Well, that's great, but like, how does it address the phishing and social engineering aspect of it? Just training people doesn't always fix that. Sometimes there needs to be some additional controls put in place, but they don't talk about it. But what you will find a bunch of paragraphs about is data encryption, which data encryption is great, should be required. But there are so many holes of data encryption that I don't want to get into in this video that it does little to decrease your risk as an organization versus the other two. So we just talked about how compliance might not be relevant. Well, guess what, though? It always wins. So when bosses and CEOs are being held accountable to the organization that they are compliant, that they are following the regulation, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if there's a better way to do things. It doesn't matter if there's something else. If they can't check the box for compliance, a lot of times you're going to lose. And that creates a problem in an organization. When you're looking to reduce the risk and having a true security program, every second you spend on just blasting through a checklist and making sure that the box is checked is a second that you're not spending on actual true computer security. And that creates a problem in a lot of organizations. And it creates this conflict with compliance and cybersecurity that needs to be addressed at some level. Number 5, it's all a lie. Everybody knows that compliance is a sham. The government knows that. Most people dealing with it know that. The auditors know that. Look, when it's a checkbox, it's a sham. Let's talk about a couple examples. Everybody says they regularly check their backups. However, you can see the number of ransomware instances where the backups were either encrypted or deleted or lost or didn't work when they went for recovery. If you were truly checking restores that they would function, you wouldn't have that problem. But it's not true. In fact, I've worked at a lot of organizations that just don't check backups. They say they do. But if you have an incident where something goes corrupt or whatnot, and you can't restore it, it's just like, oh, well, is that really where it should be? And another one, do you have a patch management program? Sure we do. Everybody does. Well, we install Windows updates. That's cool. How do you validate that all the Windows patches are installed? Well, we don't necessarily do that. We just say we install them automatically. I've been in this industry for a long time. I've never seen somebody be 100% patched on Microsoft. It's not possible. You're going to have computers that won't patch, patches that can't be applied because they'll break certain programs. And another one, the third option, a lot of them say, hey, you're going to be checking logs every single day. They clearly don't understand how many logs are generated on one computer system in a day. Now, if you're talking about security logs, there are things you can do, like you can have a SIM and you can run that through some AI or machine learning first and then have like a team look at it. But that's incredibly expensive. And quite frankly, a lot of companies don't do it. Should they? Yes, but that's another story. But do they? The answer is no. It's not possible. It would cost so much money to have a team that just sat there and looked at logs all day. Now, you could filter on some logs that might make it okay, but it still requires a team. And every compliance audit I've ever seen, every company I've ever seen, they're just trying to check the box for the audit. But they know that there's things in the business and things that are just not secure. And they know that one little thing could bring down their entire house. But it doesn't matter because they could check the box for compliance. And that's where we're at. It's a sham. It's a complete joke. I'm not saying we don't need compliance, but going back to what Chris Krebs said, we need smarter regulation. To be some latitude to it to create a better cybersecurity risk program, a risk management program inside of companies. And until that is the case, we're still going to have this problem. One thing I don't want you to walk away from this video and think that I just hate all regulation, hate all compliance, because I don't, because some of it is really good. The problem is it just doesn't adapt quick enough. And it doesn't leave gray areas. It doesn't leave a room for a better option. So with what Chris Krebs said about smarter regulation, I think it's true. We need a baseline. And if you exceed that baseline, but that baseline has to be smart. So if you exceed that baseline, then you could check the box, but you're also reducing your risk and being more secure. That's the way it needs to be formatted so that we can go above and beyond, but not violate the actual rule. And it needs to be much quicker. We waste too much time on compliance audits. Incredible amount of time are just lost on compliance audits, especially on stuff that may just be irrelevant, like we talked about. So I hope this was a little bit of food for thought for you. Like, subscribe, share. If you want to complain about regulation, go ahead, DM us. Drop a comment on this video. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any topics you want to talk about, let me know. But until next time, stay cyber safe.